When people can't control you, they start collecting evidence. That's how it always begins. Not with confrontation, not with honesty, but with quiet surveillance disguised as concern. Screens recording, conversations saved, backgrounds checked, stories cross-referenced. What they call curiosity is really fear in formal clothing, because nothing unsettles people more than someone who doesn't fit the boxes they prepared. Here's the uncomfortable fact most don't want to admit. Background investigations are rarely about finding truth. They're about finding leverage. According to workplace and social research, most informal investigations start after someone is already perceived as a threat, not before. In other words, the verdict comes first, the evidence hunt comes later. And when the hunt begins, it's usually because someone's position feels unstable. Now here's where it gets interesting and slightly hilarious. The very tools meant to discredit you ended up doing the opposite. Cameras don't lie, but they do overshare. They captured consistency instead of chaos, restraint instead of reaction. And while others were busy editing narratives in their heads, the footage was quietly archiving reality in high definition. What was supposed to be a scandal turned into a documentary. What was meant to expose flaws accidentally highlighted discipline. And the betrayal. Oh, that didn't need interpretation. It came with timestamps, angles, and the kind of clarity that makes excuses look amateur. There's something deeply ironic about watching people set traps and then trip over their own setup. They pressed record thinking they were holding power, not realizing they were signing a contract with truth. No dramatic music needed, no commentary required, just evidence doing what it does best, existing. So while some people were busy rehearsing denials and practicing innocent faces, reality was already uploading. And once that happens, all the whispers, half stories, and carefully rehearsed lies don't stand a chance. This isn't about revenge. It's about exposure by accident, the kind that happens when people underestimate who they're dealing with and overestimate their ability to control the narrative. Number one, the background check didn't expose dirt, it exposed discipline. They went digging because they were convinced there had to be something wrong with you. People don't investigate those they feel equal to. They investigate the ones who move differently, speak less, and somehow keep progressing without asking for permission. In their minds, nobody stays that clean unless they're hiding something. So they searched your past the way desperate people search for a weapon. What they found wasn't dirt, it was structure. Every trail they followed led to the same conclusion. You show up, you do the work, and you don't burn bridges for entertainment. No sudden jumps that needed explaining, no messy patterns that could be twisted, just steady decisions repeated over time. That kind of consistency doesn't look impressive at first glance, but it becomes intimidating when someone is actively trying to discredit you. They expected mistakes they could zoom in on. Instead, they found restraint, situations where you could have taken shortcuts and didn't, moments where drama would have benefited you socially, yet you walked away. That level of self-control ruins the usual story people rely on when they want to justify turning against someone. What really unsettled them was realizing your discipline wasn't recent. It wasn't something you put on once attention arrived. It showed up in old messages, past collaborations, quiet periods when no one was watching and nothing was at stake. The pattern was already there long before they started recording. And here's the part that stings the most. Discipline doesn't give people much to talk about. You can't exaggerate it. You can't twist it into scandal. You can't provoke it into missteps. It just sits there, uncooperative, refusing to support any false narrative. So the investigation dragged on longer than they planned, not because they were thorough, but because they were disappointed. They kept expecting the moment where the mask slipped. It never did. The deeper they went, the more obvious it became that the problem wasn't your past. It was their assumption. They thought power came from uncovering secrets. What they learned instead is that discipline leaves very little to expose. And when someone realizes they can't control you, can't shame you, and can't rewrite your history, frustration sets in fast. That's when the hunt quietly turns into envy. Number 2, the footage proved you weren't lucky. You were deliberate. They assumed what they were seeing was coincidence. They believed success was a stroke of luck, a fluke of timing, or the product of someone else's mistakes lining up in your favor. That's what makes people underestimate others. They confuse intention with chance. But the more they watched, the clearer it became that every move you made was intentional. Every action had a reason, and every reason had a result. Luck had nothing to do with it. From the way you approached conversations to the choices you made when no one was looking, the footage showed thoughtfulness and strategy at every turn. You didn't stumble into victories or accidentally outsmart people. You studied, planned, and acted with precision. Patterns that outsiders thought were spontaneous turned out to be rehearsed discipline. Small, calculated decisions that added up over time. That's the kind of thing that makes others feel exposed and incompetent because they can't fake it, and they can't explain it. It wasn't flashy. There was no showboating or over-the-top gestures. It was quiet, deliberate action. That subtlety is what threw them off. They were expecting obvious aha moments they could ridicule or highlight, but every step you took had intention, purpose, and follow-through. They were recording what they assumed would be mistakes, and instead, they captured mastery. What made it worse for them was how repeatable it was. There wasn't a single lucky break or a fortunate event that carried you forward. Every success, every confident response, every decision they wanted to spin, as luck was actually the product of careful calculation. And that makes people uncomfortable because it can't be discredited. You can't argue with pattern and consistency. You can't Photoshop intentionality out of footage. The more they watched, the more it became painfully obvious. They weren't uncovering errors. They were documenting competence. Every clip reinforced the fact that nothing you did was accidental. That's why the investigation backfired. What was supposed to weaken your reputation ended up proving the one thing they couldn't accept. You don't rely on luck. You rely on choice, focus, and control. And that is far more intimidating than any rumor could ever be. Number 3, their investigation highlighted your restraint, not your weakness. They went in expecting to catch fire, expecting outbursts, mistakes, or the kind of emotional slip-ups that could be broadcasted to make you look chaotic. They assumed pressure would make you crack. What they didn't account for was that restraint is far more powerful than reaction and far more unnerving than visible rage. Every frame, every recorded interaction showed you exercising control when it was easiest not to. And that control didn't come from fear, it came from understanding. You reacted with precision, never impulsively, never letting provocation dictate your actions. While they were hoping for drama, they documented calm judgment under scrutiny. Moments where betrayal could have triggered anger or revenge instead revealed deliberate, measured responses. That's what frustrated them most. The evidence wasn't silent, it wasn't passive. It was a constant, living display of self-command. They couldn't spin that into weakness because it didn't have a crack to exploit. The irony is brutal. People who thrive on manipulation assume that emotion is a weapon they can trigger. They believe if they push enough, the other person will stumble, slip, or reveal their true chaotic nature. You didn't. You didn't give them a moment to exploit, because restraint isn't absence. It's presence. Presence of mind, presence of purpose, and presence of foresight. It's a kind of power that doesn't need validation from noise or reaction. And that's what makes restraint terrifying to the unprepared. It shows that your strength doesn't come from fighting, it comes from control. Your authority isn't loud, it's undeniable because it exists in every deliberate pause, every steady response, every choice to rise above petty provocation. They expected to see weakness. What they recorded instead was mastery over self and situation, a demonstration that real influence isn't performed, it's exercised quietly and consistently. By the end, the investigation didn't reveal you as fragile or manipulatable. It revealed that no one could manipulate you at all. Their attempts to provoke, to unsettle, to find leverage, all backfired, leaving them exposed instead. You weren't weak. You were untouchable in the way they could never plan for. Number 4. They expected a messy origin story and found moral clarity instead. They assumed that everyone has a skeleton or a scandal tucked away, something that could be exaggerated or weaponized. They dug with confidence, thinking your past would crumble under scrutiny. What they didn't realize is that moral clarity can't be faked, and it certainly can't be corrupted once it's built over years. Every record they unearthed, every old conversation they reviewed, pointed to a person who acted consistently with integrity, even when no one was watching. That consistency isn't just rare, it's disorienting for people who rely on flaws to feel superior. They looked for contradictions, for moments they could twist into excuses or flaws. Instead, they found a chain of decisions that made sense in every context. Choices that some might have considered small or insignificant were deliberate and principled. Every action reinforced the pattern. You didn't take shortcuts, you didn't betray trust, and you didn't compromise values for convenience. That kind of clarity doesn't just survive investigation, it thrives under it, making attempts to smear or misrepresent completely ineffective. The irony is sharp and a little cruel. They were hunting for chaos and ended up spotlighting your control. They expected a story that could be spun, but all they got was evidence of consistency. You weren't a character they could rewrite, a narrative they could manipulate, or a scandal waiting to be sensationalized. Every time-stamped action, every documented interaction, reinforced the same undeniable truth. Your life has been guided by principles, not luck, not ego, and not expedience. And that's the part that unsettles them the most. Moral clarity isn't loud, it doesn't seek approval, but it's unshakable. They can record every movement, analyze every interaction, and still find nothing to exploit. Their assumption that everyone is flawed enough to be exposed backfired because the flaw they were looking for doesn't exist. What they thought would embarrass or weaken you only emphasize that you operate on a level of integrity they can't understand, let alone replicate. It's a reminder that some people aren't shaped by scandal. They're defined by unwavering consistency, and that is far more dangerous than any rumor. Number 5. The recordings exposed who initiated the betrayal. They assumed anonymity and shadows would protect them. They thought that by moving quietly, whispering behind doors and manipulating narratives, they could control the story. What they didn't expect was that the very tools they relied on to gain leverage ended up revealing their own intentions. Every recorded conversation, every time-stamped action, documented more than facts. It documented motivation, and motivation, when captured clearly, is impossible to argue with. They wanted the evidence to be about you, to twist it into a story where you appeared reckless or untrustworthy. Instead, the footage illuminated exactly who acted first, who planned the maneuver, and who betrayed trust intentionally. The betrayal didn't appear as a theory or rumor. It appeared in black and white, undeniable, with no room for interpretation. Every hesitant pause, every misdirected comment, every subtle action was recorded, building a map of intent they couldn't erase. What makes this especially potent is that betrayal is usually hidden in ambiguity. People assume they can mask who pulled the first thread or who whispered the first lie. You can't do that when there is clear evidence. The camera doesn't lie and the sequence of events doesn't bend to cover guilt. Their calculated attempts to manipulate perception ended up documenting exactly what they feared being revealed. They became the story they were trying to write about you. The most brutal part isn't just that the betrayal was caught, it's that it was self-evident. They couldn't claim misunderstanding, coincidence, or miscommunication because the recordings showed deliberate choices. It wasn't situational, it was intentional, and anyone reviewing the footage could see the clear line from planning to action, from intent to consequence. By the end, the investigation didn't obscure the truth, it highlighted it. The betrayers exposed themselves without realizing it, while you remained steady, composed, and consistent throughout. What they thought would give them power became the exact evidence that stripped it away. Their own moves, carefully orchestrated to dominate the narrative, backfired spectacularly, leaving them caught on camera, fully visible and fully accountable. Number 6. Your past alliances aged well, theirs didn't. They assumed history would work in their favor, that people you once trusted would be willing to testify against you, or at least make your past look messy. What they didn't realize is that real alliances aren't built on convenience. They're built on respect, shared values, and mutual understanding. And those alliances last. The footage, the records, and even the conversations they pulled up revealed a stark contrast. The people who stood by you then still stand by you now. Meanwhile, their own alliances crumbled under the weight of opportunism and inconsistency. The difference isn't subtle. Your collaborators, friends, and partners weren't just present for optics. They were present because your actions proved reliable. Loyalty in your circle isn't transactional, it's experiential. People stick around because your decisions, even the quiet ones, consistently reflected integrity. They saw you act when it mattered, protect when it mattered, and stay composed when everyone else faltered. That kind of alignment isn't something you can fake for a camera, and it shows clearly when someone tries to dissect the past. On the other side, their relationships aged like milk left in the sun. Partnerships that once seemed solid cracked under pressure. People distanced themselves, stories shifted, and excuses multiplied. The investigation unintentionally documented this decay. Every broken connection, every contradictory statement, every lapse in loyalty was captured and preserved. What they assumed would weaken you only highlighted the fragility of their own alliances. The irony is sharp. They invested energy in undermining you, but the footage and records revealed a deeper truth. Your past was a foundation. Theirs was a house of cards. The people who mattered most recognized consistency and integrity, not drama and manipulation. And when the dust settled, the narrative became clear. Your alliances reflected strength. Theirs reflected desperation. What they failed to anticipate is that the strength of your connections is visible even when you're not present. History remembers actions more than words, and their attempts to rewrite the past only proved whose life has stood the test of time. Your circle aged like fine steel. Their circle rusted, cracked, and fell apart, exposing the true difference between durability and illusion. Number 7. The investigation confirmed you don't leak information. They assumed that somewhere along the line, a detail, a message, or a private conversation would slip. They expected to catch a fragment of carelessness, a moment where trust broke, something they could turn into ammunition. What they found instead was airtight discretion. Every interaction, every file, every conversation they reviewed revealed someone who understands that information is power, and power is not for sharing recklessly. You don't gossip, you don't manipulate, and you don't let private matters become public fodder. That control is rare, and it's exactly what made them nervous. The irony is exquisite. They wanted dirt, but all they documented was restraint. Even when mistakes were possible, you didn't overexpose yourself. You didn't volunteer secrets or hint at vulnerabilities. Instead, what they recorded was composure and awareness. They assumed that in a moment of weakness, you'd slip. And yet, there was nothing. Not a single snippet could be distorted into scandal because the raw material didn't exist. Your behavior made the investigation ineffective because it relied on the very thing you never gave, material to manipulate. And that's what unsettles people the most. When someone doesn't leak information, they become unpredictable, even dangerous, in the eyes of manipulators. They can't create a story, can't control perception, and can't force mistakes into narratives. Your silence isn't absence, it's strategy. It's evidence that integrity and discretion aren't just habits, they're principles. Every clip they reviewed, every document they pulled, reinforced the fact that you operate on a level they can't influence. The deeper irony is that their own leaks and manipulations only highlighted your difference. While they left trails of contradictions and inconsistencies, your record remained clear. Every attempt to twist, provoke, or expose was met with the same calm consistency. By the end, the investigation didn't just fail to uncover faults. It revealed a truth they weren't ready to see. Someone who guards information carefully isn't just disciplined. They're untouchable in ways the careless can never understand. Your integrity didn't just survive scrutiny, it thrived under it. Number 8, they discovered you were consistent even when nobody was watching. They assumed that the true measure of a person would be found only in public moments, in the times where attention is present and scrutiny is high. What they didn't realize is that the quiet, unseen moments often reveal far more. The investigation, with all its cameras and records, captured exactly that. Your behavior when there was nothing to gain, no audience to impress, and no one to validate your choices. And that consistency was disarming. Every interaction they recorded, every decision they documented, pointed to the same pattern. You act with integrity and intention, whether or not anyone is observing. There were no hidden agendas, no calculated performances meant to deceive or manipulate. Your character didn't depend on applause or approval. It existed in its pure form, steady and unwavering. That's what frustrated them the most. They were hoping for contradictions, for moments that could be blown out of proportion, for slips that proved opportunity could lead to compromise. They found none. The irony is sharp. Most people believe reputation is built in the spotlight. But the truth is that reputation is built when no one is paying attention. It's in the mundane choices, the small acts of honesty, the times you stayed true to principles without expectation of recognition. Those moments, repeated over and over, become patterns, and patterns once recorded are impossible to fake. The footage that was supposed to expose weakness instead revealed mastery. That kind of consistency undercuts every attempt to manipulate perception. It makes rumors fragile, lies obvious, and betrayal more apparent because your actions remain predictable in the best possible way, consistent, principled, and unshakable. The investigation wasn't just ineffective, it highlighted a fundamental truth they could neither control nor distort. By the time they realized what was happening, the damage was already done, but not to you. It was to their assumptions, their narratives, and their confidence. You didn't need to perform, explain, or justify. The recording spoke for you, quietly and relentlessly, proving that your strength isn't situational. It's constant, invisible to most, and undeniable to anyone who actually pays attention. Number 9. The footage showed growth, not contradiction. They expected to find inconsistency, moments that could be twisted into hypocrisy, or decisions that would look foolish in hindsight. They thought there would be gaps, sudden changes in behavior, evidence that you were unreliable or unpredictable. What they didn't anticipate is that growth looks different when it's authentic. It isn't chaotic or contradictory. It's sequential, intentional, and measurable. The footage didn't reveal someone changing randomly. It revealed someone evolving with clarity and purpose. Every clip, every recorded interaction told a story of progression. Mistakes were corrected, lessons were applied, and behaviors improved. Nothing seemed staged or performative. Every evolution was rooted in experience. That was terrifying for them because real growth can't be faked, and it can't be attacked without exposing ignorance. They were hoping for contradictions they could exploit, but all they documented was maturity. What they assumed would make you vulnerable only emphasized how deliberate and conscious your actions had always been. The beauty of growth is subtlety. It doesn't shout and it doesn't need validation. But to someone looking for chaos, subtlety can be infuriating. They were tracking behavior over time, trying to find evidence that you were inconsistent or that your principles had gaps. Instead, they saw patterns that reinforced the same idea. Every decision had a rationale, every response was grounded in understanding, and every adjustment reflected learning, not confusion. That realization cuts deep because growth, unlike reaction, doesn't leave a weak spot. It doesn't create moments to exploit because it is self-reinforcing. The footage captured a trajectory of improvement, not lapses, and that meant nothing they found could be weaponized. In trying to expose flaws, they inadvertently documented your strength. By the end, the investigation didn't produce scandals. It produced proof that you are deliberate, evolving, and consistent. What they hoped would discredit you only highlighted a truth they couldn't spin. Real growth can't be manipulated, and real progress leaves a trail that even the most invasive scrutiny can't distort. Number 10. Their plan relied on you reacting emotionally, and you didn't. They assumed that pressure would make you crack, that a carefully timed comment, a manipulated situation, or a provocation would trigger a reaction they could exploit. They built their plan on the expectation of drama, thinking that emotion is predictable and easily weaponized. What they didn't account for is that composure isn't passive, it's powerful. Every moment they recorded showed someone fully aware of the stakes, fully in control of themselves and fully unshakable. From the very beginning, they thought they could bait you into mistakes. They wanted a slip, a flare-up, something to twist into evidence. Instead, they documented calm, deliberate responses. Your actions weren't reactions, they were choices. You didn't let ego, fear, or irritation dictate your behavior, and that single fact rendered all their assumptions useless. Every clip they captured, every interaction they monitored, confirmed one thing. You don't give leverage to people trying to manipulate you. The frustrating part for them was how effortless it seemed. There was no performance, no pretending. Your calmness wasn't rehearsed, it was habitual. Moments where others might lose control and create chaos were met with measured action. That consistency under scrutiny is something manipulators can't handle because it denies them the story they were hoping to tell. They wanted volatility. They got stability. They wanted weakness. They got composure. Emotion can be used as a weapon, but it's useless when the target doesn't play along. By refusing to react impulsively, you turned their own strategy against them. Every attempt to provoke, unsettle, or destabilize was captured, but it didn't have the effect they expected. In fact, It highlighted their miscalculation and exposed their frustration. By the end, the investigation revealed a truth they hadn't prepared for. Composure isn't a vulnerability, it's a form of authority. Their plan depended on your reaction, and your refusal to react left them exposed, powerless, and ironically, more visible than you ever were. Their expectation of emotional chaos backfired spectacularly because you don't act out of instinct. You act out of control, strategy, and foresight. Number 11. The investigation unintentionally documented your leadership. They assumed the footage would show hesitation, doubt, or confusion. They thought that if they watched closely enough, they could find moments to question your authority, undermine your influence, or highlight mistakes. What they didn't anticipate is that leadership isn't always loud or performative. It's subtle, and when recorded without your knowledge, it becomes undeniable. Every interaction, every decision, every choice captured on camera revealed someone who naturally commands respect, not through force or showmanship, but through consistency, presence, and quiet decisiveness. The people around you responded because they recognized competence and clarity, not because they were told to. Every team, every conversation, every project documented in the investigation showed that others deferred to your judgment instinctively. They weren't following orders, they were following example. And that's the kind of leadership that's impossible to fabricate, misrepresent, or manipulate. It exists in patterns, in repeated choices, in a presence that others unconsciously acknowledge. What made this even more remarkable is that the leadership didn't require explanation. There were no announcements, no claims of authority, no forced displays. Every decision made sense in context, every action carried weight, and every response inspired confidence. The investigators thought they were observing someone vulnerable under pressure. Instead, they recorded someone whose influence was consistent, calm, and unshakable. That kind of authority doesn't demand proof. It reveals itself naturally. The irony is biting. The very attempt to catch you off guard ended up highlighting the trait they were hoping to undermine. They assumed leadership would falter under scrutiny. They assumed influence could be exposed as overconfidence or misjudgment. What they found instead is that true leadership shows itself in quiet, deliberate action and is amplified under pressure. By the time the investigation concluded, it wasn't your flaws that stood out, it was your command. What they thought would weaken you only underscored your ability to guide, direct, and inspire without saying a word. The cameras captured authority, and authority, once seen, cannot be ignored. Number 12. They found no pattern of exploitation, only boundaries. They assumed there would be opportunities to twist your actions, to frame interactions as manipulative, or to portray you as someone who used others to climb higher. They went into the investigation expecting leverage, expecting weaknesses they could weaponize. What they discovered instead was that you operate with a strict, unwavering sense of boundaries. You don't exploit situations or people for advantage. You protect your space, your time, and your principles, and that discipline was laid bare in every clip they captured. Every conversation they reviewed, every interaction they recorded, demonstrated that you know where to draw the line. You engage when it's necessary, step back when it's not, and never allow others to manipulate your intentions. That's far more threatening than being aggressive because it leaves no entry point for attack. Exploiters rely on inconsistencies, on the ability to provoke reactions, on blurred lines. You don't provide that. You operate clearly and deliberately, and the investigators couldn't find a single moment where you overstepped or took advantage. The frustration they must have felt is almost palpable. They were hoping for someone they could misrepresent, someone whose decisions could be framed as opportunistic. Instead, they documented restraint, consistency, and a firm commitment to principles. Your boundaries are not walls meant to isolate. They are markers of integrity that signal exactly how you operate. You protect yourself without harming others, and you engage without sacrificing your values. That clarity is intimidating because it can't be manipulated and it can't be misrepresented without exposing the one trying to do it. What's remarkable is how this exposure reversed the narrative entirely. The investigation meant to paint you as vulnerable to influence ended up highlighting a rare kind of power, the ability to interact with others fairly, strategically, and morally, while remaining untouchable to manipulation. You don't exploit, you don't compromise, and you don't bend. And when people realize that, it changes how they perceive every interaction, every choice, and every moment recorded. Your strength isn't loud. It's unassailable, built on principles that don't need validation, but are impossible to ignore. Number 13. The cameras revealed who benefited from misunderstanding you. They assumed that confusion would work in their favor, that gaps in perception could be twisted to make you look incompetent, careless, or unreliable. What they didn't realize is that misunderstanding has a way of exposing those who manipulate it for gain. Every interaction they recorded, every message they reviewed, didn't just document your actions. It highlighted how others reacted to them and, more importantly, who profited from misreading your intentions. What's striking is that misunderstanding doesn't exist in a vacuum. Someone always benefits when perceptions are distorted, and the investigation unintentionally shone a light on exactly who those people were. While they were trying to find flaws in you, the footage made it clear that the damage wasn't caused by mistakes on your part. It was caused by others projecting, misinterpreting, or outright misrepresenting your actions. In other words, their schemes to discredit you inadvertently expose themselves as opportunists. The irony is sharp. They expected confusion to be a tool they could wield against you, but the evidence turned that assumption on its head. Every careful decision you made, every measured response, and every principled action became a reference point against which deception could be measured. The more they tried to create doubt, the more obvious it became who was twisting reality for personal gain. Their attempts to fabricate fault highlighted their own agendas, their own insecurities, and their reliance on manipulation instead of merit. And that is the brilliance of it. The investigation, designed to weaken you, ended up mapping the landscape of opportunism around you. It showed who sought to profit from false narratives, who benefited from chaos, and who relied on your perceived mistakes for leverage. You didn't have to expose them. The evidence did it for you. By the end, the footage revealed not just your strength, composure, and consistency, but also the truth about everyone else's motives. Misunderstanding you didn't harm you. It revealed the real players, the manipulators, and the ones whose gain came at the expense of honesty. In the end, clarity doesn't just vindicate the disciplined, it exposes the opportunists. Number 14. What truly backfired was their assumption that truth is easy to manipulate. They walked into the investigation with confidence, believing that reality could be bent to fit their narrative. They thought that with enough digging, selective editing, and whispered insinuations, they could control perception, rewrite the story, and make you look flawed. That was their first mistake, and it turned out to be their biggest. Truth doesn't care about assumptions, agendas, or manipulations. It simply exists, and when it does, it has a way of dismantling false narratives on its own. Every record they pulled, every recording they watched, every time-stamped interaction captured more than behavior. It captured reality in its purest form. Nothing they did could hide context. Nothing could erase patterns, and nothing could mask the consistency of your actions. They assumed a slip would appear, a flaw would surface, or a moment of weakness would give them leverage. Instead, they documented calm, deliberate choices, integrity in action, and a life lived according to principles rather than convenience. Their belief that truth could be shaped to fit their story didn't just fail. It highlighted their own incompetence. What's fascinating is how quietly devastating this backfired on them. They spent time, energy, and mental effort trying to find cracks in your armor, not realizing that the only cracks revealed were in their assumptions and motives. Every clip, every interaction, every piece of evidence underscored the same point. You can't manipulate what is genuine. The more they tried, the more obvious it became that the narrative they wanted to push was fragile and artificial. By the end, their plan to undermine you collapsed entirely under the weight of what they overlooked. Truth is patient, unyielding, and self-evident. It doesn't need exaggeration or spin. It doesn't rely on interpretation or manipulation. When reality is observed carefully, it exposes everything: strength, consistency, restraint, and leaves those who try to twist it looking exposed and desperate. What they assumed they could control ended up controlling them, and in that irony lies the ultimate lesson. Truth doesn't argue, it exists, and when it does, it always wins. The truth is rarely subtle, and it never bends for those who try to manipulate it. What began as an attempt to discredit, expose, or control ended up revealing more than anyone could have anticipated. Every investigation, every recording, every attempt to twist the narrative backfired spectacularly. Instead of catching flaws, they documented discipline. Instead of finding chaos, they revealed restraint. Instead of exposing weakness, they highlighted integrity, consistency, and deliberate action. The irony is unmistakable. Those who thought they held power ended up exposing their own agendas, insecurities, and opportunism. Every move they made, every assumption they relied on, became evidence of their miscalculation. Meanwhile, your composure, your moral clarity, your deliberate growth, and your unshakable boundaries were captured in full view, untouchable and undeniable. What they thought would weaken you only strengthened the truth. Authenticity, self-control, and integrity cannot be manipulated. This isn't just a story about being investigated. It's a lesson in power, perception, and consequence. It shows that when you live deliberately, act with purpose, and honor your principles, the attempts of others to control the narrative will inevitably crumble. Strength isn't loud, influence isn't performative, and truth doesn't require embellishment. All it takes is consistency, clarity, and the patience to let reality speak for itself. If this video gave you insight, a new perspective, or even just a moment to rethink how power and truth interact, don't keep it to yourself. Hit that subscribe button to join the channel, like the video to show your support, comment below with your thoughts, and share it with someone who needs to see how discipline and integrity always outlast manipulation. The truth doesn't chase attention, it endures. Make sure you do too. Stay blessed always.